Of course, I've always established that 1988 was one of the best years for 80s horror, and we've already talked about Pumpkinhead as one of those that I regard as one of the best ones of 1988. I'm going to probably put this one as the footnote, the game changer for 80s horror. It is Child's Play. This is it. And of course, I'll put this high up there as well. This is obviously a top five for me as well for 1988.
Well, it's one that's still in the confines right now after six sequels,
Yeah.
3 seasons of a TV show. I mean, hell, Chucky's in the White House now, so he's gone some places.
Yeah, so we're going to talk about something that was initially we didn't know it was going to be a phenomenon, but it's definitely a game changer, and I get lower to that. And today we're talking about Child's Play.
Welcome back to the show, everybody. I'm one of your hosts, Kyle Goethe from GoatFilmReviews.com.
Hi, everybody. This is Nick from the St. Paul Filmcast. Thanks for finding us. Thanks for watching. And for our Loa fans, thank you for continuing to support the show. You can follow the show on X and on Instagram. Yes, we do have a Patreon. Check that out for some great deals and some great content and an opportunity to tell us what movies we can review on the future with, of course, a shout out to you. Hey, hit the like and subscribe button. It's a little thing you can do, and it's a big thing for us. It can help out the show, and tell your friends about the show as well. Both Kyle and I are members of the Minnesota Film Critics Alliance. Check out that webpage for critics' reviews as well as ours. And today we're talking about from 1988, Child's Play.
Andy Barkley has just gotten the best birthday present
Andy.
ever. A good guy doll. Good guys are able to respond to commands, do all sorts of fun jobs, and even slaughter without end. Well, this one can, because good guy doll Chucky is actually Lakeshore Strangler Charles Lee Ray. His soul passed into a doll as he lay dying, and he'll be Andy's friend to the end.
Okay, of course, and then prior to this movie, we did have, in fact, in the 80s, we had some movies that featured mechanical dolls that had evil spirits taken over. Twilight Zone did The Living Doll. That's an inspiration for one of those movies. Actually, we had the movie Dolls, for God's sakes.
Yeah, it was just the year prior, I think. I think Night Gallery, the sequel series to Twilight Zone, also featured a living doll. It's kind of been prevalent throughout.
And there's a couple episodes of a doll being a menace in the TV show Twilight Zone too. It's not a new concept, but it's revolutionary for the horror aspect of a slasher content. Mostly when you have dolls, it's featured more as like psychological component. Here we're using the doll as merely as a vessel for a slasher film, a slasher category. Prior to Child's Play, you did have actual kids' toys in the 80s. You had Teddy's Ruxpin. You had My Buddy.
I actually had a My Buddy doll.
You had a
I
My
still
Buddy?
might have him. I don't know. I know I had one, and this changed my perception of him. As well as the perception my family had of
It
him.
is intentionally. And of course, with My Bunny was a spinoff with Kid's sister. I remember those commercials all prevalent a long time. This was kind of a movie that was looking for a director.
Well, so you have Don Mancini, who, I mean, everyone kind of says that they had different inspirations coming to it. They all thought about, again, it's a pretty simple concept.
Right.
But Don Mancini thought about, when he was at UCLA, the idea of using a killer doll possessed with an evil soul and having it be something along the lines of like critiquing and eschewing like marketing towards children and the way that we bastardized consumerism in the 80s, which we absolutely did.
Right. So the content is kind of, let's talk about the consumerism of toy commercials, toy products, bombardment of kids' products on television, the materialistic part of it. Not to mention to market horror movie as almost intentionally for children. Which is kind of thing as in horror movies you see it's for teens, and it's usually a grown adult man with a knife and everything.
Yeah,
it's kind of interesting that we have it miniaturized almost.
Yeah, well, in Mancini's original script, I mean, this is one where like you definitely see all three screenwriters contributing to the script greatly. Mancini's original idea was that the doll would be this doll that could bleed when you roughed him up too much. And like the idea that there would be blood inside the doll that would mix with the kid's blood when he cut his hand or something, and then that would create kind of the living doll, whether or not it was Charles Lee Ray or a
It's an
killer
interesting
at that point.
idea, but to execute it would be kind of on film can be kind of redundant almost.
Yeah, and so it was good that he almost had that ability to like throw the ideas around and have them get interchanged and run, because Mancini also had one like major feature film writing credit prior to this, and it was a film called Cellar Dweller. That I think he did for Full Moon, or it might have been Empire at the time. He did that film for them, and basically it was one of those films, much like the RKO pictures. He was given a title, and said, write me something in a single location with this
Sure.
title. And so Cellar Dweller, it's an interesting enough movie. It's nice and short, but at the same time, you can see the starting of an idea there that he would kind of continue to move on with, the idea that our childhood obsessions kind of grow into something.
It's also kind of, we're almost in the downslope, not beyond the peak of 80s slasher horrors. It's kind of almost run its course in 88, and you need something kind of a little more refreshing. Obviously, the campaign of Michael Myers returning was a big thing, came out in 1988. I've advertised that well. So you need something to compete, especially if you're a slasher category. You need something new and refreshing, and almost kind of a detective kind of a story. I love horror movies where, no, you have to believe me, it's real, but everybody else doesn't believe you. Kind of like Smile did that recently last year.
Yeah. Well, and of course, when we eventually got director Tom Holland involved, he had also previously done that with Fright Night. And also,
Yes.
to an extent, Psycho 2, his screenplay. If you guys don't believe me, this is actually happening.
Right. So it's kind of prevalent with Tom Holland's stories. And prior to Tom Holland, there was opportunities of like William Friedkin getting opportunity of it. In fact, a lot of people passed on to the point, I think that the production looked for Spielberg.
Well, they looked to him, and he was the one who kind of pushed for Tom Holland getting hired because he'd worked with Holland on Amazing Stories.
Right.
Amazing Stories is one of those series that if you haven't seen it, it's incredible, but it's also really hard
It's
to
amazing.
find. You can't find it streaming on any services right now.
I think
It's hard to
Spielberg
find
wants
home
to ignore
video.
that he made that. Right.
But the thing is, so many amazing careers were started because of working
Right.
with Spielberg on Amazing Stories, and we've talked about a number of them on this show already. So Tom Holland was just another one added to the fire.
Okay, interesting component to this is there's 3 different voices for Chucky made by 3 different actors. You have a stuntman who actually did it. Everybody should know Edward Gale. He did a lot of other movies. I think I can't remember off the top of my head what kind of movies.
He was specifically hired too because of the
Howard
fire
Duck,
scene.
yeah.
He was hired for the fire scene at the end.
Okay.
Specifically because they also did have, I think you probably mentioned John Franklin was another in-suit performer, and he's mostly known for Children of the Corn. He was Isaac. So 2 iconic horror people within a 10-year stretch is pretty good, but he never got the credit for it, of course.
Moving on, because yes, he's also Edward Gale was Howard and Howard the Duck. Charles Lee Ray comes from Charles Manson, Lee Harvey Oswald, and James Earl Ray. If you want to know the manufacturer and why the sinister concept of Brad Dourif. We don't see Brad Dourif very much, but it's,
Yeah, we wouldn't see him again in the franchise, physically see him until the 6th installment. So you almost forget that there's another person behind that doll.
right. It's almost like I think in the member he was in Deadwood, and he talked about that he was Chucky, and everyone was like, "What?" And then I was the guy in Chucky. You forget in the beginning of the movie. It's almost very much like an '80s bang 'em up cock. Almost like a Rambo, almost like Cobra almost coming in and just blasting away.
Yeah. 10 years later, we would see a different variation when Gary Busey would play the Ginger Dead Man, and he would appear in the first few minutes of the Ginger Dead Man, get killed, and then get cooked into a cookie, and end up going on a killing spree, and to a lesser extent, I would say.
Saturn Awards, which awards for horrors and sci-fi. So Catherine Hicks won Best Actress for it with a heavy competition for the time, and this got nominated for Best Horror Film, but lost to, I believe, it was Beetlejuice.
Tough year.
Tough year. It was very compact. Even in fact, Hellbound Hellraiser was nominated for that. So heavy competition for Saturn Awards. It did get a lot of accolades for it. Before we get to a review, it came out in November of 1988. Perfect timing because it came out after Halloween. And I think this was kind of like a daring, bold move because it was a perfect time because even though you have Halloween horror movie withdrawal, this is a spark for something new. It's a right spot for it to advertise with something new for a slasher because it did make a lot of money.
Oh, yeah. It turned into an overnight hit, and that's why you would get a sequel in 1990, and then, no joke, the 3rd film comes out less than 9 months after the 2nd one. Like, they wanted to strike while the iron was hot with this franchise, to the point where even the writer says, on number 3, I didn't have enough time to write a screenplay, so we started shooting without one, because they needed to get this movie made. They were like, we have to get it out.
I remember the campaign for this is you didn't see the doll. You see a lot of cuts of like him running past him, like, what's that?
Yeah.
Which was more of enticing because usually the advertisement for horror movies was you see the big, you see Jason in the rain, like another Jason movie, or here comes Michael Myers. But here it's like, what is that? And you didn't really advertise that it was a doll. You just seen like Child's Play. It's like coming out of nowhere. It's behind you now.
That's what makes the first film in the series so interesting, is because pretty much with every single other film, we know what's going on. Like, we have an insight on it. This is the only film that begins as a mystery, that begins as an unfolding piece. And I think it was producer David Kirshner who produced all of the films in the franchise. He's producing the TV show. He even produced Hocus Pocus, for you horror fans. David Kirshner wanted to be like Alien or Jaws, like eliminate as much of Chucky early on as we can and make it the mystery. And I think that was something he clashed with Tom Holland about, because there was even an additional 25 minutes of Chucky footage that was excised from the film because of a rough test screening. So they took out a bunch of Chucky, and he's still pretty prevalent in the film.
And at the time, you need that because you probably want more Chucky for part 2.
This thing was always meant to be a franchise.
Right, yeah. And the classic scene of, I'm going to throw you in the fire if you don't wake up. And all of a sudden, there he is, like, whoa!
And he's just going. That whole scene actually is quite a feat for suspense filmmaking, because there was the idea that you're a mother whose son might be insane. Like, you might have actually have like a broken child in a lot of ways, and what do you do with that? She goes home, and the fact that she opens it up and she grabs the box and the batteries come out.
I love that part. When I first time watching it,
open it, and he turns around and does the thing. Like, it's such an exercise in suspense filmmaking, that scene alone.
It's always the little steps before you do the big steps, right? Yes. Perfect time. So that's enough content. Let's get to our review of Chucky. Child's Play. Or it was really called what? Blood Buddy? It's supposed to be called
Batteries Not Included was also a title.
Batteries Not Included.
Let's talk all of it.
Right, yeah.
This was not the first Child's Play film I saw.
Really?
It was actually the second one I had seen. And I have a very early memory of going up the stairs and watching it from the distance as my parents watched it, because I knew I would never be allowed to. So I'd seen 2 and probably 3 before I swooped back to 1, because it was a little bit more difficult to get in my town. I already knew that Chucky was the killer going into this film because I'd seen the other films.
Okay.
But the mystery worked all the same. And I think as a younger person, I didn't appreciate it as much as I do now, because as a younger person, you want to see Chucky doing the hack and slashing.
Yeah.
Every time I view the film, though, I appreciate it more, which is funny because it's a movie I've always appreciated.
It's an increment of, I love the psychological component, even though it's a slasher movie, because you have all these components of, is your child believable? Is your child going nuts? Remember the 80s kind of, almost the kid is being abandoned. Like, he's not even being supervised at the beginning of the movie. I get a charm out of that. He's making a mess out of everything. But then he leaves school, and he's not even nobody knows he left school.
Yeah. Chicago, get your stuff in straight. Okay,
he's on the bus, and like, people leave him alone. But that fits for the time, because of course nobody would ever do that, because it seems weird now, but it fits for 1988. Of, we just left people alone. All right, the kid's on the bus. He's supposed to be at school. They left him alone. Right. You have the increment steps of, I don't believe my kid, but also the danger that he's hanging around the kid, and then we know the kid is maybe making stuff up, or the child's communicating with him. Yeah. So you have a definitely of almost like a Spielberg dusting of it, of where is it coming from? Because I know Spielberg likes to work with the family dynamic a lot.
It's almost like rated R Amblin. I do get that feeling, because there is this sense that he has made up this doll, that he has conjured up this best friend because he is so lonely. His father is gone. I think in some deleted scene they said he had died. He doesn't have like as many figures in his life. His mom's always working. He's always having to be looked after. Yeah. This is his friend. And like, that is so heartbreaking as a viewer. Both as a kid, I thought it was heartbreaking, and an adult, to have him love this doll because no one else is around, and then to have that kind of trust broken is just an evil damn thing. And I think that's what makes this movie work in a way that Michael, Freddy, Jason have never really worked on their own, because it has a heart to it, and that heart gets broken.
In fact, even the landscape territory is not inviting. The school is kind of a rough neighborhood, but it's never talked about. It's just kind of the origins of where the kid is almost texture of kind of the neighborhoods I kind of grew up. They're a little bit rough, but even though he goes to the bad guy because Chucky told him to, and that kind of navigates to an area. But the action, the stunts are great. It's shot very well. I think it's very well written. It's hard to put up in like 1 or 2 of best of '88.
Yeah, it's an incredible film. It's not my personal favorite of the series, but I think but I do think it's one of the top performances from Brad Dourif as the role, because again we get to see him actually as Charles Lee Ray, so you get that connection to the pieces that that I think makes Chucky's performance better. I think the first two films feature some of the best puppetry ever put to film because I don't see the flaws. I don't see the strings holding up the skeleton, if you will. It's all done so well. There was 9 puppeteers working on this film, and then you had 3 different performance actors. This was a small community working to make one character work, and if he doesn't, the whole movie is worthless.
Right. There's no. It's very easy to do a movie with this kind of concept, and you have Chris Sarandon going, "Oh my God, I'm doing this movie."
Yeah.
But it's all with not a wink to the camera, legit, and everybody puts their heart to it. Where any moment that kind of would slide away and make it silly.
Yeah.
But the concept is kind of silly, but it's presented as plausible.
Yeah. And I think that's something that Holland did so well with his previous film, Fright Night, was that I felt the plausibility that my neighbor could be a vampire in that film. He did it in such a realistic way that you understood the character and you believed that that could be true. And the same thing is true of Chucky. I had a My Buddy for years before I saw Chucky, and afterwards I didn't look at him the same again. It's like I had seen a new side of him. And part of that is because of Holland's ability to craft a compelling narrative beginning to middle to end.
And I do think you have to go that way for the movie to end. Mm-hmm. Even though it's a doll, you need to get that carnage that we all appreciate because it's been so sophisticated, and you can't have a little whimper at the end. You need something there.
Yeah, the first half of the film is almost Hitchcockian because we don't really get the monster, if you will. And it could just, I mean, in a Hitchcock film, we'd almost would find out at the end that the kid actually is crazy and that he's been doing all the things for
right, the doll was, right.
But given the fact that Holland is able to work around that, make it believable, so when we finally realize that Chucky is alive, then the movie changes. It's almost like a different film at that point because then it becomes the monster movie.
As soon as she attempts to throw him in the fire, the movie changes.
Yep.
And that's a perfect pivotal point.
And I think the finale works well. It's at their home. It's at the safe place in their lives. It's the place where the film started. It's the place where most of Chucky and Andy's relationship began. So it is a perfect place to end that narrative for them. I think the film is an incredibly strong, probably the best made, even though it's not my favorite of the series. It's probably the best made of
I understand horror films will appreciate like 2 and 3 with the going to the military school and all that stuff.
Yeah, I've always appreciated more once I knew Chucky was the doll.
Goes on to adventures and gets his counterpart in Jennifer Tilly and everything. I want to give a shout out at the end before we end this is cinematographer Bill Butler. We've already done a couple movies where Bill Butler has been the cinematographer. He was for Jaws. He did Anaconda.
Mm-hmm. He did Grease.
We just reviewed Demon Seed, and I thought it was a good opportunity to do Demon Seed. I'm like, oh, okay. Moving on. And then he did Grease, and then Frailty was one of the surprise hits in 2000.
Oh, yeah. We'll be talking Frailty one day soon.
But it's almost like he's not flashy with the camera, but is set perfect to what he needs to do. There's an opportunity where we get the point of view of Chucky, and it's a handheld camera of him do, and that's very effective. So Bill Butler, for Jaws, it's not like flashy, very enticing cinematographer, but he frames it and sets it right every time. There's even a kind of an Alfred Hitchcock mode where you get the bird's eye view looking down. He kind of cheats a little bit. But I would agree, it's hard to get accolades for a horror movie cinematography when it's not the flashy kind.
Yeah.
But props to him for doing this effective movement for cinematography. I loved it.
The big important thing is that you don't get lazy when there's downtime because he had to do Jaws and this film, which were both puppeteering nightmares of having to make sure you film without getting the 25 people involved.
Right.
So and he said himself there was time when like Chucky's parts just didn't work and like the lip moved down and things acted all weird and stuff, and it's like you can do everything right and then have just the randomness of the machine fail. Or someone press one wrong lever and it has to be done again. It would be incredibly taxing to make this and not have those elements be visible. Because we've seen horror films time and time again where you get the little boom mic in somewhere, because there's such a low budget.
Because it's hard to get the puppet, take 20 is probably the best one and you're already tired.
And you've also got a child on set with him and the child can only work so many hours, so you have to get things right. Like there is such a time crunch to this film.
Exactly.
I'm so surprised it came out as good as it did.
Yeah. Principal photography happened in January of 1988 to March of 1988 and it wrapped up editing, everything, production, and sent out in November for release. Rental didn't come up to like April of 1989, which kind of makes you want to come on, where is it? You know, it's almost like
prepping for number 2
hold
at that
off
point.
the hold off the viewers as long as possible and wait, and then you explode with the rentals. And the rental for this movie, I know, exploded.
Yeah.
when it came out.
Well, it's important to know because I think in the time period, you know, Chucky's had less time to exist than a Michael, than a Freddy, than a Jason. But I think he belongs with those three in terms of the iconography. And he's actually the only franchise of them that has not had to retcon or force a remake. And I don't count the remake made by MGM because I think it was a shitty move. But because they did it while the main series was still going. But I do think like it's the only one who hasn't had to reboot, hasn't had to do anything like that. The franchise has just consistently gone. It's the same timeline, the same continuity, and it's still going strong. TV shows are really hard to make, and the fact that Chucky is still happening, I thought that show would be canceled one season in. I like the show, but I thought it'd be canceled really quick around season 3.
Right, and you don't get this movie without Megan. And then I know Megan is kind of almost a millennial version of this, but Megan's very effective.
Yeah.
Very effective.
Yeah, there's a number of doll films that probably only happened because of that. I mean, hell, there was the Krusty doll in The Simpsons, one of my favorite living doll creatures ever. So we wouldn't have a lot of it. This probably saved this subgenre because it was kind of relegated to those cheesy anthology style shows.
Exactly.
And this kind of made it scary again. We had Goosebumps Night of the Living Dummy because of that, which I probably read around the same time I watched the movie. So
yeah, so it's a revival of the kind of an old formula, but it's kind of a renewal. It's another addition to the subgenre of slasher where you mix in a little bit of a mystery. So you have all these kind of nuclear camps of horror and put them in together.
Yeah.
And he bounce out really well.
Yeah. I think it's a collection of good choices thankfully made because we haven't even talked about the fact that you know, Jessica Walters was cast to voice Chucky at one point, the mother from Arrested Development. She recorded all of her lines. Her lines are the ones that was in the longer cut for test screening. So we're not sure if it was because they just didn't respond to the voice or whatnot. Then Franklin redid the lines. Then they finally brought in Brad Dourif to actually do the lines once he was in the doll voice. And it's like, that's another thing where if you had picked any other version of it, it might not have been as solid. It might not have worked the way it did. It's a smart decision.
Keep the conversation going. Put down a comment. What do you think about our review and our history of Child's Play?
Yeah, and let us know what your favorite sequel is, or maybe your favorite total film.
Oh, I like 3.
Three. Yeah, three's messed up, but man, I dig it.
Yeah.
There's a lot of good ones as long as you stay away from Seed of Chucky. Just get away from that one. But yeah, let us know your favorite film down below, or defend Seed of Chucky if you have to. And thank you guys for joining us. You can find all of my film reviews. We're still working through the 31 Days of Horror, including an old, probably 6-year-old review of Child's Play, which is way on that website.
You refreshed it?
It's back there a while. I was thinking about hitting up the second one this year.
Okay.
So.
All right. And I'm Nick from the St. Paul Filmcast, a podcast you can find anywhere you find podcasts.